Hello students, welcome to the video review for the Healthcare Ethics final exam for fall 2020. In this video, I will go over details about the exam format, give you some advice for completing the written study guide, which is available on Blackboard, and I will give an example for how you could complete one of the terms that's on the study guide. Okay? So before we get to the exam, a reminder about your op-ed assignment, which is due this Friday. I very much look forward to reading them. If you have any questions about the op-ed, please email me as soon as possible. So the op-ed is due on Friday, December 11th by the end of the day. If you have not yet sent in worksheet 10 from week 14, that's the worksheet from 2 weeks ago, you need to do so, okay? So it was the worksheet about the film No Mas Bebés, but it contained in it the pitch for the op-ed assignment, and that is the important part. The pitch is a necessary component of the op-ed assignment, and if you don't do that worksheet, your grade on the op-ed assignment will suffer. So if you don't submit the pitch, if you don't submit that back worksheet, you're not going to get a good grade on the op-ed. But if you do submit the pitch, I can read it over and give you feedback that will help you complete the assignment. So most of you guys have done a great job and submitted the pitch, but I'm still waiting on a couple, and you can still do it. You just need to send it in ASAP, okay? So if you haven't submitted the worksheet from week 14, please go and do so now before you deal with the study guide. Okay. On the exam. The final exam is going to be a lot like the midterm. So you guys have done this already and you know what to expect. Just like the midterm, it is a take-home written exam. It is also an open book exam. That means you can look back over your notes, over all of the readings and your past worksheets, but you are expected to complete it on your own. So you cannot call anybody else in the class, you can't text them, you can't ask your brother or your sister or your mother. You have to do it all on your own. You are also expected to cite the course materials in each of your answers. Okay? So this exam will be graded in the same way as the midterm. That means you will get points on each question. You'll get points for the answer itself, for how well you explain your answer, and for your citation. So that means that you need to include a citation in every answer. And if you don't, you're going to lose a whole bunch of points, okay? So there were a couple people who had really good answers on the midterm, but they forgot to include citations, okay? So you've gotta include citations if you want to do well on this exam. Okay, so the exam will be posted on Blackboard at 6 p.m. on Monday, December 14th. That is 1 day less than a week from today. The exam will be due on Blackboard at 11:59 p.m. on Wednesday, December 16th. Okay, so that means that you have a little bit over 48 hours to complete the exam, so 2 full days. You will submit it through the Assignments tab, just like you have been doing with your worksheets and just like you did with the midterm exam. If you have any trouble submitting the exam on Blackboard, you can simply email it to me. I will be available on Blackboard Collaborate Ultra on Monday evening when I post the exam at 6 p.m. to answer questions about the exam. Okay, so on to the review guide. There is a study guide posted on Blackboard under course materials in a folder called Final Exam Review. That is probably where you found this video if you are watching it. Like the study guide for the midterm, this study guide gives you a list of terms. These are mostly terms that we encountered earlier in the semester, terms like autonomy and beneficence. But there are a couple of new terms, too, from the second half of the course. So there are terms like implicit bias and white fragility. The first thing that you should do when you are studying is write down a definition of each term on this list in your own words. Okay? Try to do this from memory to start with. So don't go back and look at the course materials just yet, but test yourself. See how much you remember. This will help joggle things loose. Okay? Then go back through the articles and verify your definition. So compare what you wrote down from memory with what the authors wrote. Did you remember it correctly? Are there pieces of the definition that you might have forgot? Is there something you need to add? So when you're there, looking up these definitions, write down the page number and the author for each definition that you found in the readings. Many of these terms appear in multiple places in our readings, so there are many possible right answers for the citations, but there are definitely some wrong ones too. So make sure you're getting the right answer. Make sure, it's a clear definition. What you're looking for is something that explains what this term is and how it functions in healthcare ethics. Okay? So once you've come up with your own definition of the term, go back and find a reading that clearly provides a definition for the term and verify your answer. I'm going to give you a little aside here about the exam, and useful for completing your worksheets too, your study guides. So don't use outside sources, okay? Do not use outside sources to help you complete the study guide or to help you complete the exam. The exam is there to test your knowledge of the course concepts and the course readings. So we did 2 projects in this course where we asked you to do outside research. We did that the op-ed assignment and the informed consent brochure, right? Those were great, and it was really good that you guys learned to engage in outside research on healthcare ethics. But don't do that for the exam, okay? Don't use Google Scholar, don't use Wikipedia, don't use any of these possible outside sources when you're working on the exam. It won't help, because the purpose of the exam is to test your knowledge of the course readings and the course concepts specifically, okay? So don't bother to waste your time looking up new sources for the definitions. Just go back over the things that we already read in this course, okay? All right, so once you've got your definition in your own words and a source to back you up, so I would encourage you to write those definitions in the study guide, also without relying on your earlier worksheets, right? Because the point of this study guide is to joggle things loose from your head, make sure they're there, right? But that said, you can always check yourself against what you wrote in the earlier worksheets, and you can use them as a resource when you're preparing your exam as well, okay? So you can check yourself against the course readings and against your worksheets. The readings are way more important, okay? So once you've got your definition checked against the readings, it's time to connect it to one of the examples that we have read or watched together in the second half of the term, okay? So if you remember back to the midterm study guide, I asked you guys to come up with your own examples for each term, but this time you don't have to, which is pretty great, okay? So instead, what I'm asking you guys to do is think about how the term that you see on the worksheet is exemplified in one of the films or other cultural objects that we encountered as a class, okay? I am asking you to do this because the questions on the final are going to ask you to do a similar thing. They're going to ask you to apply these big abstract concepts like non-maleficence, and justice to the specific cases that we dealt with in the second half of the term, like the case of Geheimic Math. Okay? So, I'm going to walk you through how you might answer one of these terms on the study guide in your preparation for the exam. We're going to do autonomy because it's the first one on the list, and I bet you guys know what it is already, right? So I'm not giving away any secrets. Okay, so what is autonomy? We have encountered it everywhere in this course, right? It is probably the biggest key principle of biomedical ethics in the United States. It describes the ability of a person, in this case, a patient, to act as an independent individual, to make their own choices and act of their own free will, free from coercion, free from the influence of others. Okay, so that's my definition. Now that I've come up with that definition, it's time for me to go back and check it against the readings, right? So if I think back all the way back to the very first reading we did this semester, which was called The Ethical Foundations of Clinical Practice by Linda Farber-Post and Jeffrey Bluestein, I'll get a definition of autonomy. It's actually a really good source for definitions. So I would encourage you to look back at that chapter. But the definition that Farber-Post and Bluestein give is the following. It's on page 8 of their text. Autonomy includes the determination of healthcare goals, power over what is done to one's body, and control of personal information. Only when the individual cannot make decisions are others asked to choose. Autonomy gives priority to personal values and wishes, supporting choices that are informed and uncoerced, and confers the professional obligation to respect patient privacy and confidentiality. So that seems like it aligns pretty well with the definition that I came up from before, especially on these points about choices, right? In choices, supporting choices that are informed and uncoerced, right? But based upon this, I might want to go back to my definition and add in something about information, right? I just had a thing about coercion, but maybe I want to redefine it as an autonomous patient is able to make well-informed choices, free from undue influence from others. And maybe I also want to add that patients have an autonomous right to information about their health, right? This connects to the point they're making about privacy and confidentiality. That point is a pretty useful one, and I might want to add it here or save it for the definition of confidentiality that comes further down on the worksheet. Okay, where might I find another definition of autonomy? The essay by Bruce Miller on autonomy and the refusal of life-saving treatment is a pretty good source. It's got autonomy right there in the title, right? And what Miller has to say is, in biomedical ethics, the concept of a person as an autonomous agent places an obligation on physicians and other health professionals to respect the values of patients and not let their own values influence decisions about treatment. So again, we've got choices here as decisions, right? Decisions about treatment. And it seems pretty well in line with what we said above, right? He's got an idea of values that's maybe akin to the idea of information we were talking about before. And perhaps it places more emphasis on the problem of coercion, right? Patient autonomy means that healthcare providers must refrain from coercion. That is, providers must not let their own values influence patients' decisions. Okay, but based upon all of that, we now have a pretty strong working definition of autonomy, and we have some good ideas about what it means. And we have two good possible citations. So then what do we do about the application part? Where did we see autonomy at work in the second half of the term? And the answer is basically everywhere, right? So autonomy was a big part of the concerns that showed up in the confidentiality article, which is the first article that we read after the midterm, right? We didn't do a worksheet on that one, so it's going to be a little bit hard to review, but it was pretty clearly written. So if you go back to the article, it has some nice, useful graphics that will help you with this term confidentiality, right? And autonomy showed up there in the test cases at the end, right? It was about respecting the autonomous decisions of the patients regarding their healthcare information. Autonomy was certainly at issue in terms of the ethics of quarantine. So remember the week that we read Foucault? And the issue of public health versus individual autonomy. So think about the anti-maskers, the people who refuse to wear their masks, and how they're saying they're exercising their individual choice against the, mandates that are for the broader populace, right? So that's a question of autonomy, maybe one that doesn't look as appealing to us, right? And autonomy also showed up in the two films that we just watched, right? In No Mas Bebés and The Farewell. So you can think about how autonomy was denied in very different ways to the different patients in each of these films. And autonomy even showed up in the workplace discrimination readings the week that we watched Angels in America. So remember that article by Garin and Rasmussen? It was a couple weeks ago, but if you think back to it, so those authors ask, what happens if a patient says that they don't want to be treated by a black doctor, that they only want to be treated by a white doctor? Do they have an autonomous right to make that choice? What should the hospital do? The answer that Garin and Rasmussen give is no, right? They say there are limits to patient autonomy, and that in this case, the patient does not have a right to choose the race of their doctor. The patient's autonomy should not be respected, okay? But again, it is an issue about autonomy. You need to know the term autonomy to understand the stakes there in terms of ethics. Okay, so autonomy shows up everywhere, right? Some of the other terms will be a bit more specific, right? They'll only show up in one or two places. But you'll want to write down as many connections as you can think of so that you'll be super well prepared for the exam. All right? So that's it for this review video. And so just as a reminder, the exam gets posted on Blackboard at 6 p.m. on Monday, December 14th. And at that time, I will be available on Blackboard Connect Ultra to answer questions. The exam will be due 2 days later on Wednesday, December 16th at the end of the day. Okay? If you have any questions in the meantime, please send me an email and I will look forward to hearing from you, and I'll look forward to receiving your op-ed assignments. All right, take care.